Hey, good evening. Welcome you all to the 11/18 meeting of the Water Transition and Evaluation Committee. Thank you all for coming this evening. Let me walk you through what we're going to review tonight. We've got a fairly straightforward meeting. First of all, we're going to review and approve our last meeting minutes. Then we're going to walk through the proposed updates to the rates and rules and regulations for the water company. If you recall, a few weeks ago, we saw what was currently in place with Aquarian, and our folks from EPG, Environmental Partners, are going to walk us through some of their proposed updates to it, and we're going to walk through some of the details. We're going to talk about a little further detail as well some of the other items, which include the water conservation, includes water balance program, the abatement process, and the rate setting process. We're going to talk in general about all those things. And then lastly, well, then in addition to that, we're going to kind of walk through some of the tasks that we have, which include a update on the RFP process, any movement on the water superintendent, and I've got a communication-related announcement I'm going to be making this evening. And then certainly we'll entertain any questions from the audience as appropriate, and then we'll talk about what our next steps and meeting dates will be. Sound good?
Yep.
Great, so let's jump in, and thank you for your patience. I submitted to you today. If anyone needs a copy, I have it, of the minutes from our last meeting, which was on 10/28. I'm not sure if everyone has it, and I'm open to any discussions or updates you may have.
I've read through them. I'd make a motion to approve them if I get it seconded.
Second?
All approve the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great. Thanks all. You guys are easy. Appreciate it. Okay, now let's jump in. Again, just as a reminder, and I'm happy to submit, if anyone in the audience would like a copy of what we're going to review, I have copies of it. Again, we had a...
Give him a color.
Thank you. Great, thank you.
Do you need any other copies for?
Anyone else need it? Okay, sure. So just as background, once again, for those folks that may be watching, part of the critical rules that govern how the system interacts with its customers is the rules and regulations of the water system. And this is a document which covers, again, how the water company will be interfacing and handling certain situations. It's really the contract between the water company and the ratepayer. It's a way to think about it. And it's really a critical component that the DEP looks at as well, to make sure that it is in place prior to any transfer of licenses to us. But most importantly, it's a way for customers to make sure that they're being treated fairly in the process, and they're aware of how they're going to be treated under certain circumstances. Today, that contrast is in existence between Aquarian and the ratepayer. And that was something that we looked at, the current contract, or the current rules and regulations that were in place a few weeks ago. And our consultants from Environmental Partners have gone through a process of looking at that document, identifying areas where it may be improved and or expanded upon to make it more clear for the ratepayer. So we're going to review some of those changes tonight. Now, bear in mind, this is their draft, and it has not yet been fully vetted by town council. The expectation will be, though, that once those rules and regs are in a form where they're ready to be presented, the attorney will go through them, ensure that all the proper legalese is taken care of within the document, and then the next step after it goes there will be there'll be a public session where the public has a chance to opine on the rules and regulations and submit any questions or proposed changes. And then lastly, the water superintendents will ultimately review and or approve those final rules and regs.
The superintendents or the commissioners?
The commissioners, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Did I say superintendent? I meant the
That's all
commissioners.
right.
Thank
That's
you.
what we thought, but
I just checking to see if you're listening.
that's
Commissioner.
right.
Good. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the baton over to Ryan and Mark from Environmental Partners. They're going to walk us through the updated rules and regs as proposed and amended. We have them up on the screen here, which may be helpful, and for those folks at home, I believe they're going to be showing that as well. So, turn it over to you guys.
Good evening. Well, thanks for a great introduction. I think you really covered it all there. You know, the rules and regulations, as Jim said, really define the policy and purpose of the water system, what a new customer can expect from how to hook up to the system, to billing, the abatement process, and just general rules about where to put a meter, how a meter is serviced, how are they going to be billed and invoiced for the water, where do they go for if they have questions on their bills, and different things that the town has to state as far as, you know, if there's theft of water or any vandalism, or so it outlines some general enforcement on different items that can go into effect. Okay, so I have the draft rules and regulations that you all have in front of you up on my computer on the screen, and I was just going to slowly scroll through them and stop at a couple of key points and just sort of generally kind of explain the reason for modification. Sometimes might scroll by something, just, I want this to be an open process, so, you know, any committee, just please, you know, raise your hand, I'll stop and we can go over something in more detail if I go through too quickly.
So you'll entertain questions and comments as you go.
As we go, absolutely, right. Yeah, I want this to be sort of like a roundtable discussion on the rates. Okay. So we just as a basis, we took the Aquarian rules and regulations that they had existing and modified them as appropriate to reflect the town ownership. And we also found, upon reviewing them, we ended up condensing a lot of sections together that were a little repetitive. Grouped a lot of the billing questions or answers just into like one section instead of listing it multiple times. Really treated the customer as just a customer instead of a non-residential and residential customer, so you'll see that reference striked in your document a couple times. We really beefed up the water balance description inside the rules and regulations. We found that it was lacking in that sense in the existing rules, and added in the abatement process, going through the appropriate town channels, and the rate setting process as well, that as being a municipally owned water system now, you'd have to go through that, a different process than Aquarian as a private company would have to go through. So just going through the table of contents here, the reason why the public fire hydrants and private fire service and private fire hydrants are still highlighted, that section has not been modified yet, so I'm going to be skipping that section entirely tonight. There has to be sort of a meeting scheduled with town council and Tom Mayo and others that we have not done yet, that will go through this section about the ownership and responsibility of the town and the hydrants. It's a little a different situation than you would normally see in a water system. Okay, so we'll probably skip over that, or if you have any comments related to that, we can take them down and bring them to our meeting with Tom and town council if you like. Sure.
Will Hull and Cohasset be a part of that?
I think we're going to have the subsequent meeting first, and then we would go out after that to gain some insight from the local towns.
Because they handle it differently effectively, correct?
Right, yeah, so Hingham, I think, has to get sort of internally understand what they'd like, and then go out to Cohasset and Hull after that.
And there ultimately will be an intermunicipal agreement between, I don't know if that will be part of, if this will be part of it or not, but that will be part of the work between Hingham and Hull and Cohasset.
Yeah. Okay. So this first, I think everyone can see that text, but you want to shut the lights off? Would that work out better for you? Okay. The first section is just basically the rules and regulations governing the service, is just essentially stating some of the Mass General laws that which gives the town the governance over the water system. Defines sort of the authority of the Board of Water Commissioners and the Water Superintendent. The policy and purpose we added in this section, I think it essentially helps define what the town's purpose is for the water system in general. You know, that they want to encourage conservation, but yet make sure that they're providing a high-quality drinking water to, and fire service to all the residents.
It's a nitpick comment, but the words under vision and increased revenue, I wondered what that meant in the policy and purpose.
Generally, water systems, obviously, they don't run for profit, but revenue can mean a couple ways of helping to pay and offset capital projects and other items that may or may not lead to rate increases. They may not be one and the same, but we'll circle that and go back to see how that's worded. Yeah.
I also had a comment about the vision. One of my objectives as part of this committee is to instill a theme of continuous improvement in the operation of the water plant. And I thought it would be useful in the vision to actually talk about continuous improvement as an annual objective. I come from the business world, and a lot of companies have what they call continuous improvement programs where a bunch of metrics are used to judge how well an operation is serving its customers, how well it's operating its manufacturing process, things like that. So my main objective is to make sure that we do have, as part of the vision, a continuous improvement mentality or goal. I can offer a sentence, or you can, imagine.
Love to hear a sentence, yeah.
Okay, well, I have here, in addition to the sentence that currently appears, the words, maintain and operate the system with annual continuous improvement goals in service, operational efficiency, and water quality.
Can you read that second half again to me?
I'll read the whole thing, you
Yeah,
can
thank
pick up. Maintain and operate the system with annual continuous improvement goals in service, operational efficiency, and water quality. So I'm trying to, basically, the customers, the product, and, the operation itself.
Great.
Okay, anything else in section 2, policy and purpose? Okay. Moving on to definitions in section 3, we've added in a couple references to your committee and Citizens Advisory Board, and these were we added in essentially the charge of each of the committees in here, and the role that they would sort of play throughout not only the start and transition of the water system, but then afterwards, once the water system is owned by the town for, essentially more than a year or so. The rest of this section sort of just defines a couple terms that are used throughout the entire document. And when I say refer to material specifications, one thing that we did add to this rules and regulations was an entire appendix that requires certain materials to be used, like the type of pipe, type of corporations to use, things like that throughout the water system for outside contractors. We feel that section, the water superintendent, once hired, will have a lot of say over some of the materials, and he may have some specific requirements, but we reflected some of the things that Aquarian had to maintain consistency through the system, but also some of the best management practices that we've had in this industry.
This is maybe getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but in the rate section, you distinguish between residential, commercial, and industrial. And if I understood the changes correctly, you basically stripped out or combined certain sections that dealt individually with those as being repetitive. Should there be a definition in here as to what constitutes residential, industrial, and commercial?
We can, I think, either that or at the end of the document on the rate setting, for the rate pages that define each usage, we can talk about it there, but I'll add a note here to look at, maybe adding in the definition and where it would refer to.
In the section on hydrants, which I know you haven't written yet, you use the word municipality, and if you continue to use that word in your rewrite, it confused me a little bit in comparison to the word of the town. So you might want to consider how you use the word, or maybe define municipality.
Any other comments in section 3? Section 4, I think, somewhat explanatory about a new application for a service. We struck out some discussion purposes in here. Some things to do with billing, we tried to lump everything in one billing section, and then references to LLCs. It's a little different here as far as the town. You know, the town has rights, obviously, to assess liens on different properties if it's within the same service area. Have a little more power in collecting money than, say, the private water company would. So that was striked out of the document. And also making reference to the discontinuance of waters. We have that as a new section, and that's been modified, so we have just an asterisk there to reference that once these sections are all ironed out.
This is almost a question for the committee, but at what point will we have an organization that a person would go to for making a water application? It just says the town here, so.
Well, we'll have a water superintendent, and they'll have an assistant as well. And I would imagine that they'll be the conduit in the initial front group to handle those sorts of things.
Okay.
Then in addition, we'll have the third-party operator as well, and at some point, we'll determine under what circumstances the customers go to either the water superintendent or to the third-party operator based on their needs.
Okay, it's not necessary to have that detail in this document, then?
No, I think that water superintendent is defined above to manage the operator and to report to the town administrator, but I believe the intention is they essentially handle the day-to-day applications and essentially work of any capital projects and management of the operator, and if anything comes in, they would then get that application. They have to, the water bank process comes in to that effect of going through that process as well, so.
Is that kind of covered in the business plan, though, too? The procedures, is that at all touched on there?
No, the
No.
business plan doesn't get into that kind of detail.
No operational procedure?
Okay, section 5.
Hey, Ryan, just
Yeah.
one quick question for you. So you struck on paragraph B, a payment plan and overdue charges. Will there be a process to how we accommodate those situations where someone is in arrears?
There's more detail in the billing section of this rules and regulations about, I believe it says something in there about a payment plan or 50%
Okay.
payment. But when we get to it, we can hit on that.
Because I would imagine it would be the town's, that, we like to work with our residents on, difficult, when they're in difficult situations. I don't want it to appear that we would take a draconian methods in order to, stop them from being able to access water.
Right. Section 5, what I get out of the most of that is just defining essentially, the customer, again, is responsible from, excuse me, let me back up for a second. So if they come in and apply for a new water service, the town is responsible for bringing the service to the curb stop. Because the town owns the water main, the corporation stop, the service line to the curb stop at the property line. The customer will then own the curb stop all the way into the home. The town will provide the meter, but the customer is responsible for all essentially the internal plumbing.
So how does that, currently Aquarian has that insurance program or
Service line?
service line program where they kind of charge you, is that still going to be in effect, or how's that going to roll over from Aquarian to Hingham Water or whatever it's called? How's that going to work?
I believe the service line program is done through a subsidiary of Aquarian. So as far as the ownership of that, I think it's independent of the, this is my
That's
opinion,
something
but I
that
think,
should be kind of listed, because there's a potential for some confusion there.
Yeah, I agree. You know, they just sent out bills for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone received one or, I know that that's a question that the selectmen were working through.
Okay.
I don't know what the answer's going to be on that one yet. But
Okay.
it's definitely, has been discussed internally as to
Yeah.
where that goes.
Right.
Because technically, it's not part of what we're buying.
Okay.
right.
Jim?
Ralph?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Make a comment about that?
If you don't mind, sir, because we're being recorded, if you don't mind identifying yourself and,
Rolf Yesterby, Chairman of the Water Commission in Cohasset. Just one thought on the meters, which we found is an issue, because now you're getting into something new which you haven't been dealing with. If you're going to build new homes or new businesses, it's best to have the meter close to the street, because if a pipe breaks, and it's the meters at the house, and the pipe breaks from the street to the house, you will not know that. And it'll leak forever until something comes bubbling up through the ground. And you'll have a lot of lost water that way. That's what we found. Suggestion.
Yeah, there's a, one of the regulations asks, it says for any service line over 100 feet requires a meter pit. Yeah, so that's in the regulations right now.
and that should avoid, for the most part, not all of them, but most of them, great, thank you.
Yeah, sometimes you get in a situation, like you mentioned, that you could have a 200-foot service through the woods, and you never see it. It could be next to a wetland, and you never find the leak, and so, it's true.
I'm not sure, or not familiar with the building codes, but when you look from a policy perspective, is there a requirement that all new homes utilize best available designs or whatever with regard to plumbing fixtures? And if not, is that something that the town at least ought to discuss in terms of water conservation going forward?
I think it's addressed a little bit in here, but I think that's a good point, that if it's not and it can be incorporated, it should be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how far
Yeah.
the town wants to go in terms of imposing that sort of thing, but
Right, that's a good point.
We do have that in our rules.
Can you elaborate, like,
So,
what?
yeah, I'll repeat it. So, so some municipalities like Cohasset address it in their planning codes, that for conservation purposes, a certain specification around plumbing is specified. So we can certainly look at what's in there today. I'm not just familiar with what's in the building code.
Yes.
May already be addressed and may not be, but we can find that out.
yeah.
And the water balance program is for any user that uses water over 100,000 gallons a year, has to trigger that water balance program. And part of that is providing funds for low-flow devices, leaked, things like that. So I'm sure that as part of that process, that review would be done for plumbing fixtures. Now, as far as a residential home, that's something that we'll add and look into to see if, what the code may already require for toilets or other showers or fixtures that require the low-flow device.
I mean, it seems like there's a huge potential to reduce demand to the extent that you can change out the existing stock as well, which is something that, at some point in time, the town ought to look at it, whether it's now or some later point, incentives, even paying for change-outs.
I think there's already something in place around that, but I think we're going to address that a little bit tonight. I think. Kurt?
Kirk Schultz, 65 Prospect Street. It seems like that appropriate discussion would be within the conservation, the water conservation section within the regulations. And if you remember my request in the past two meetings, that I hope that when we get to irrigation systems, that will be within that section, and only just best plumbing practices, right? We use that with the Board of Health when we do our restaurants, but also maintenance, O&M features within irrigation systems, and so I look forward to getting to that. I believe the committee has already looked through the regulations, because it seems like you're putting in a lot of comments here. So this is going to take a little bit of time.
Yes.
I'm just writing them down as I go through, and so I'll be back later.
A lot here. Thanks, Kurt.
And one other very narrow point, the definition of 3 bedrooms or less, I don't know whether this is a practical problem or not in any of the towns, but technically speaking, if you've got a 4-bedroom house, then you fall outside of the category of this definition, and basically, one could read this to say if you were building a four-bedroom house, that you've got to be in the water balance program. And maybe that's what's intended, so I don't know whether that is something that ought to be discussed or not.
Yeah, I think if you go by Title V flows, I think over a three-bedroom would put you above 100,000 gallons per year, so I think that's why they use that as a trigger. However, you probably could prove based upon usage of a standard household, say, each person may only use 60 to 70 to 80 gallons per day, so I don't know if you'd have to argue if it's four, go down that road of having four people in the house, or, yeah. Okay. Anything else in section 5? The other thing we added in here, just to let you know, is that, in 5H, is we put a time frame on when these service connections could be installed. And here, we just added reference to the issuance and permits in other towns, because obviously we can't approve a street opening permit, the town of Hingham can't approve a street opening permit in Cohasset or Hull, so we have to say that has to be coordinated with the other water system towns, okay, before the work is completed.
Is that really too restrictive? When you take a look at the average temperatures in November, I mean, we had a cold snap now, but there really isn't a hard freeze. We're talking about 5 months of the year.
The rule of thumb is November 15th through usually March 15th to April is the general rule of thumb. It kind of follows Mass DEP protocol, Mass DOT protocol for road closure. You can get waivers, so that's the thing, is it is up to the individual towns. Some allow, December 15th now is sometimes a more realistic date. But we wanted to leave it like that unless we said in there, except at the discretion of the town where the work is being performed, so.
So does that mean any new openings or existing have to be completed by then?
Any work period, but I think if it's new, I mean, if there's an emergency, obviously that trumps anything.
So
But,
if there's a project in place started in October, it has to be done by November 15th?
unless they get approval
Right.
on their permit with that town to keep going or shut down.
So you couldn't reasonably make an application on October 20th and expect the work to be done within this?
Right, yeah. We've done public works projects all the time like this, and, if someone comes in for a permit on November 1st and it's a 3-month project, they're probably going to say, no, you're going to start in spring. But if they come in late October and say, I just need to install a service, it'll take me 2 days, then, it's probably pretty sure they'll get approved to do the work. So. Section 6, customer service pipes. Here essentially just stating that what happens sometimes is if they apply for new service and the town puts in, well, excuse me, let me back up. We have to understand what kind of flow you can anticipate from that new service connection. So there could be a time where if you need a lot of flow and you're putting a small service pipe in, there could be some hydraulic restrictions with that. So this essentially gives the town the authority to help size the private side service connection line to make sure that there's enough flow and pressure being delivered to the customer. Okay. This also has different descriptions on the depth of the service line, down 5 feet. It kind of gives you little descriptions of how the service line should be laid. And I think the section H there that was added, we essentially wanted to try to root out an issue of if we had a service line going down one person's driveway, it wasn't like a tee off of it going to the next house. We wanted to make sure it was clear that each separate customer or parcel would have to have its own individual service line to each location. So people couldn't just tee off each other and start serving each other without any notice given to the town.
You can, if you're a single residence and you have an outbuilding such as a barn, you can tee off after your meter to go to that outbuilding?
Yes, yeah, I would say as long as that usage is sort of cleared with the town to make sure your service line's sized, appropriately.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I don't have a barn, but I'm just curious.
And that does, the water balance program also applies to expansion and service of existing use. So if someone, for example, they have just a single-family home, but they develop a lot behind them, put in this, I don't know, huge house, I'm just coming up with an example in my head, that may qualify for the water balance program.
And the change from 4.5 to 5 feet, is that just industry practice these days?
Yes, yeah. I would much prefer to list 5 feet as the standard. It is the standard for water main. Sometimes services can be, the way they're tapped, be angled up to about 4.5 feet and laid at 4.5 feet of cover. But I always like to just list 5 feet as a minimum. Anything else in section 6? All right, section 7 is fairly small. I think this is mostly meant for just temporary special instances of water service. So if you're having a construction project on site, you need to apply for water just for use for construction purposes, for masonry, you're building things. What they're trying to do is say that that's not exempt from going through the process and using water and being charged for it. Yeah. Section 8 just talks about customer's liability. We eliminated, you can see, the basic service charges after that. We wanted to put all of the billing stuff in that billing section, so that's what I said about how we're kind of condensing some of this. I'm trying to read this here as I talk, but essentially the customer is liable for anything that goes through the meter, and we wanted to make sure that that was clear. If there's obviously a leak inside the house, that's essentially on the customer. That would, I would think, if it's a very high bill, would trigger that abatement process if someone can prove that it was a leaky toilet or something else that they were unsure of or unaware of.
But a leak between the main and where the meter is typically for residents in a house, if there's a leak in that, the homeowner is still responsible for the water that leaks before the meter, even though it's after the town?
They're responsible for fixing it.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not a great way to quantify that other than identifying how much it's flowing once you dig it up. But
Right.
as of right now, if it's identified that there's a leak after the curb stop but before the meter, that it's the homeowner's responsibility of fixing it. And I can't remember which section it is, but it goes through the steps on notifying the customer of the leak, and if they're not responsive and it's still leaking, then the town has the right to shut the water off or discontinue service to the property.
But there is no way
Here
to...
again, I'm not sure where the proper location is, if at all, but what's the status of old meters as opposed to meters that are able to be remotely read? And is there any conclusion about the town or the water company adopting a policy where there's a commitment to go to remote read meters?
So Aquarian only has a small handful of manual reading meters right now, and the policy that we're putting into the RFP for the operator is to replace 10% of the meters annually, focusing on the meters that are obviously not within that remote reading capability yet. So the older meters are made a priority for replacement over the newer remote read meters. So that, essentially you always want to, the older the meter is, it could be under-registering the flow to the resident or the customer, so we tend to try to replace those first and then replace them with the newest technology that we have for reading the meter.
And related question, if you have a remotely read meter, is there a requirement, if you've got an irrigation system, that meter be remotely read as well?
No, I don't think so.
I think to answer your first question, my understanding is that Aquarian has replaced almost all of the meters in the system at this point. So there's very few that haven't, with the exception that Ryan was talking about, and that's going to keep going. The irrigation meters are there to serve as a reduction in what your water usage is that you're billed for on the sewer bill.
Right.
Okay? So that's not tracked by the water company. It's, and therefore don't need to be remote read. At my house, for example, I do have an irrigation meter, but I have to write down what the usage has been and send it to the sewer commissioners in order to get the reduction in the sewer use bill. And so far, anyway, that's the policy the town is going to keep with. Right, Kirk?
Okay, anything else in section 8 or 9? Well, excuse me, the old number 9. We took out basic service charges and moved that down.
Are we still on 9?
We are set to begin the new section 9, metered service,
All right, okay.
location of meters. Okay. So this got cut out a little bit to deal with just the standard customer. We discussed this before, if anything over 100 feet, we'd like to have the meter installed in a meter pit or vault or a town-approved above-ground enclosure. We're trying to eliminate all confined space entry and vaults for meters and moving everything above ground if possible, and like they call them little hot boxes or sheds that are generally heated with a small enclosure, so nothing freezes. So this section was cut down just to talk about that one rule of thumb. We have some requirements for inside meter installations. And generally, you can find a meter pit that is anything for a meter smaller than 2 inches is a pretty standard meter pit. It's a small cover, maybe a foot in diameter or so, 18 inches in diameter, that you can easily access just by reaching down with your hand and pulling a meter up. It's when you get into meters larger than 2 inch where it's very difficult to have a meter that size be in a big pit. So that's when you get into something that, with the size of the piping and meter you need, it's more of a vault setting, and that's what we'd like to have something maybe above ground.
Who would be responsible for the heating of that? Because I see that there's a charge for a frozen meter.
That would be on the property owner.
Okay.
To take care of that, yeah. and provide the above-ground shelter.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is, in new paragraph A, there's a statement here that says that a key must be provided to the town for meters installed inside of a premises. So the way I read that is, the meter at my house is in the basement, and it seems to say that a key has to be provided because it's inside. I'm sure that's not the intent.
Yeah, I was confused by that same statement.
Yeah.
I'll look at that. I think that might have been pulled from the section that had a commercial with sometimes in a commercial building, there'll be a separate meter room, fire service room and meter room, so we'll revise that section.
I think it would be best to revise it and take into consideration the existence of these remote meters and use the word remote meter, because that's what you said most of the town currently has.
If not remote meter, then do this. And
Yeah.
if it is remote, don't worry about it.
Right. Well said.
This section's a little long. I'll give you 30 seconds or so just to kind of read through, see if you have any other comments.
I think in new section B, I think it's B, maybe the customer shall install a meter with an inside meter setting in order to comply with applicable confined space regulations. That's the one you're talking about, the shed?
Yes, yep.
Okay, you might want to, I would think you might want to clarify that the owner is responsible for said shed, and heating it or tempering it, whatever they need to do.
Any other comments on section 9?
Ryan, explain to me the, you struck, I don't know what, is it another A, but if it's determined that more than one existing building, apartment, or premise, is that,
That, we moved that up to the section before, if you remember.
okay,
Yeah.
goes up there, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's why a lot of these comments, you see deletion, sometimes, like, we were just finding, like, references all over the place in certain sections. We just decided to make it more concise.
Okay, great.
And green means you moved it, right? Doesn't mean it was deleted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah. Okay, section 10. Plumbing must be approved by the town. Really no edits here, other than the fact that they'd like to have a licensed plumber complete the work to connect to the water system. So generally, the new service goes in, service line will be installed, it'll be inspected by the operator. The inside, they'll obviously need a plumbing permit to do the internal plumbing work from the town. Licensed plumber needs to perform the work, pull the permit, and then the plumbing inspector would go out and view things before they're all set.
And is the customer service line from the curb to the house, is that restricted to the same seasonal restrictions as the curbside installation? So if you put a house in the winter, can you,
No, I mean,
If it breaks in the
good
winter,
luck,
you're gonna
good luck
need
digging in January, but, I mean, it can be done. I mean, I've done that, work like that, outside those restrictions. That time period is mostly related to opening up a road, paving,
Right.
the availability of no pavement, but if you're digging up your front yard, that's a little different.
okay.
Not gonna be able to grow any grass until the spring, but,
It may seem obvious, but does it make sense to say the plumbing inspector owns that in A? Because there's a lot of references to town in here. So that, all, section A, the plumbing inspector owns all that, is that how that reads? There's no,
well, yeah, we just want to make sure, we'll try to differentiate maybe between the scope of the plumbing inspector versus the scope of the town/water operator.
The water operator wants to know that the curb box to the meter was installed, or done properly,
Right.
right? With sand instead of gravel
Right.
or whatever. And
Exactly.
from the meter in is probably mostly where the plumber takes over.
yeah, I mean, I just,
But yeah, you're right, it kind of is a little slightly confusing.
approved by the town, like, who is that?
But you raised the interface question between the water supervisor and the operator as to
Well,
who
there-
is going to be involved in terms of a connection like this.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the intent is or what the custom is.
We've done a lot of these connections in that water system we're building from scratch, and generally, the operator will be there to view the outside work. They'll provide the meter. The plumber will then install the meter. The operator will go in and just check as well for any potential cross connections inside the home, especially because if someone is trying to keep their well or, use it for irrigation purposes, there has to be completely separate, independent plumbing systems and then labeled as such. And then afterwards, the plumbing inspector would come by and just double check and sign off on the final permit. So we can just expand on that in that section.
So would the Hingham plumbing inspector inspect Hull residences, or would that be
No,
left to the Hull?
no, that would be each individual town would have to
Okay.
be, yeah.
There is provisions already made in section 6 for the customer service pipes. It says that the service connections would be inspected by the town.
Okay.
So if, for example, service connection was being made, during the winter season, there's that opportunity there. But I think it's a good point that you raise, that you should be specific,
Yeah, just the way towns
whether
work.
it's
I
the
think
operator versus the
Plumbing inspector.
So all the departments in town are aligned.
Right, and the
Right,
applicable, the
right.
applicable town, not, because the town with a capital T implies Hingham.
Correct, yeah, exactly right. But generally, anything from foundation in is plumbing inspector, everything outside. So, yeah, I think that's a good suggestion, though. clarify that in definitions and in the regs.
Okay, section 11, cross connections not allowed. Cross connections are not allowed, pretty much. That's the summary. No.
So you're saying they're not allowed?
Yeah. Not much to explain here, and we didn't change much, obviously, from the original rules and regulations. If no one has any questions on 11, we'll move to 12, damage to meters. So essentially, the customer is responsible for providing a nice home for the meter, to prevent freezing. Repair any damaged meters will be done by the town, and they'll investigate whether or not it was the cause of either vandalism or just lack of, if they was in something that was freezing temperatures for the winter, or say they left and they didn't shut their service off for the winter, if they left seasonally, things like that, the operator would have to go in and make a judgment.
I'm just throwing it out there, and I'd love your feedback. So, we keep referring to the town, but it's really the water system,
I was just about to say the same.
right? So, shouldn't there be some sort of a separation between the town with a capital T
Well, it's defined on.
and the
on-
water system?
In section 3, I was just looking for that as well.
Town equals water system, is that what it says?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's defined here, the words town or.
Okay, yeah, the town of.
No, I had the same, I was trying to
and water
find.
system, okay. It's just a little
Yeah, town could be anything if you,
not
unless you
confusing,
understand.
but I'm just wondering if we think about, rather than defining town as a town of Hingham water system, if we come up with a different acronym for the water system as opposed to the town. Because it can be confusing, Hingham's gonna pay for that, as opposed to, really, the water system is responsible for.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. I think we should.
I guess if on page 4, that
Kirk
first
Schultz
line
says,
in the definition.
member of the Board of Health in Hingham, that's an essential point. The town is the governance structure for our municipality. The Hingham water system, if that's the name you're going to give it, is the system. And so I've circled that, and when we come back to definitions, I had a whole bunch of definitions I think need to be added and amended. But that's the most significant so far you've mentioned.
And that also raises the question of where's the money going to go? Does it go to the impress, does it go to the impress fund, or does it go to the town coffers?
Well,
So-
it should be going to the enterprise fund, if it's,
Agree.
right? So so I think we need to think about that as how we define the water system.
Yeah, but it starts really in paragraph 1 with the definitions.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So we eliminated the section called multiple meters conjunctive billing. That was moved under one big billing section, which we'll get to. Section 13, meter tests and fees. Essentially, I'm just going to paraphrase here. Meters are tested for accuracy prior to installation. Usually they'll come with a tag and let you know that it was tested at the manufacturing facility, if you're putting a new meter in. This is delineating the responsibility that you have to let the town in to replace your meter, okay? And when I say town, I mean the water system, okay?
There you go. TWS.
And this kind of delineates that you have 14 days following the receipt. If you refuse that, you'll have another 14 days after termination notice. And so this kind of goes through the process here of some dates here that you can follow if you're getting a non-response and trying to replace someone's meter. Because with the operator trying to replace about 10% of the meters each year, that's about, say 12 to 1,400 meters. That's a lot of residents they have to reach out to, schedule appointments. Divide that by how many working days there are in a year, you can kind of estimate how many meters have to be essentially replaced almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there an industry definition for, or standard for periodic tests? Or should there be words to the effect, at least every 5 years or 10 years, something like that?
So the standard for meter testing, generally source meters with the large meters that kind of are at the treatment plant and say for Linden Ponds or, large user, those have to get tested annually at a minimum. Residential meters don't get tested. They're just generally replaced, usually on hopefully a 10-year cycle is the rule of thumb. Sometimes it slides in other towns to water systems to, say every 15 years or so.
So does that get picked up in the RFP in terms of establishing what needs to be done by the operator, or should there be something more specific here?
That's included in the RFP for meter calibration and testing on the source meters, and then the meter replacement program.
How much are meters, just out of curiosity? A residential
A
meter?
residential meter, depending upon the kind of, a rule of thumb around $200 it includes the meter and the radio, that essentially the register on top. You can get some cheaper, you can get some more expensive. Okay, this next section on public fire hydrants, I'd like to skip over unless you'd like to have any comments, because in all honesty, we haven't spent much time on this because we've been sort of directed to wait until we have a meeting with the town.
Yeah.
Just my comment on the word municipal or municipality, and that probably ties in with the whole debate about the use of the word town.
I'll make a note of that.
Thanks.
So that brings us to section 16.
Just a general question on 15, private, are there any private fire hydrants? Just as,
Yes.
And that mainly refers to sprinkler systems, as opposed to somebody having a private hydrant?
Private way, yeah, it could be on a private road.
Okay.
But there's still discussions on that subject, so.
well, you say private way, but I live on a private way, and we don't have a hydrant on it, we're short enough, so, okay. I just wondered how it was handled for, say Brewer Way, as an example.
Put one there for you.
Pardon?
Put one there for you.
Well, no, it's right at the end of the street. I was just curious as to who has what responsibility when you get into private ways.
Exactly some of the things we have to talk about. See, we'll definitely get into that, yeah. I don't know if you even have to add to that at this point.
The issue of private ways and how they're handled by municipalities changes from municipality to municipality. And typically, we're not used to seeing at all private hydrants, so to speak. So that's why it's important that we have this discussion with the town folks to see what direction they want to go with that.
There's also liability associated with that, so can you, as a public water system, can you trust that someone is adequately maintaining and servicing a private hydrant? And the point in time you go to use that private hydrant, if there's a fire and the fire department goes out there, that's like, a fundamental question of the basis of some of what we have to discuss.
I know there are appropriate places within the regulations in which the operator has a defined role. Remember that the operator is under the auspice of the town. And so a number of these places in the fire section, that the operator shall have these responsibilities. It's really the town has the responsibility, and it's the operator that carries out those duties. So just when we're, maybe one of the rewrites will be to define that a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now section 16. This essentially defines different ways that someone could be terminated from being able to take water from the water system. Unpaid bills, wasting water, refusal.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
can I ask, so you gave one example, right? Such as failure to repair service leaks? What, are there any other, like, I wouldn't want to list 100, but is that, on number 2, first, page 16, number 2, you say such as failure to repair service leaks.
Oh, okay, I see it.
Is that the predominant one we're concerned with, or are there others that we should think about?
As far as just terminating someone's water?
Well, just for the, for willful or indifferent waste of water, right? That's a,
Well, I think this entire section is subject to termination. So if someone doesn't pay their bill after,
yep,
if someone was wasting water or failing to repair the system, if someone is failing to allow you to
that's my
come in and
question, like,
release.
who determines if it's a waste of, like, what, I don't want to get over analytical
Okay.
here, but like, what is a waste of water? If it's not a leak that I don't know about, what else could be?
Well, I think that the section is referring to, say, in that situation where there's a leak between the curb stop and the meter, we're not metering that water, so you're not charged for it. So on the homeowner side of it, you're not in a huge rush, obviously, because it's going to cost you money to replace it. So that's the only vehicle that the water system has on getting you to essentially repair that, is to say, hey, you need to shut that off right away. We're going to have to shut off your water until you do so.
But I think your point is that we could simply say, failure to repair the service without using the words for willful or indifferent use of water, because there is a judgment element to that. and
That's how I,
we
yeah,
have
I
defined-
mean,
And it sounds like some lawyer wrote that, for example.
I mean, you could,
But we could be direct and simply say that, because you asked the question, well, what else would be considered willful or indifferent waste of water? Well, I run my slip and slide every day for my 15 neighborhood kids in mine, and I want to do it. You may call it willful, but, so long as it's going through the meter and it's being paid for.
or irrigation during a ban.
Right, and there are provisions for
Okay.
Elsewhere, yeah.
regulating that as well. So, we could tighten that up by simply taking out that first phrase. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I just
Yeah.
think it's pretty,
And going back to the 30, the change from 45 to 30 days, help me with that.
That was a comment made from a town personnel about just being consistent on the 30-day billing cycle, and I think that's where most of the other town departments have for due date for bills and invoicing.
Is a municipal lighting plant like that? Is the-
It might be, that was just something that they commented on.
But in practical terms, somebody doesn't pay their bill in 30 days, are we really going to shut off the water on day 31?
If it were me, probably not, but I think it allows you the right to do so if they're going through that process. Maybe is it 90 days, 60 days? I guess that's up for,
But
right.
Yeah, I would imagine,
Yeah.
does the state have the state probably has a policy around.
I mean, it says
An
may
essential
be terminated,
service.
it doesn't say will be. It says
Right.
may.
shouldn't there be a notice provision in here as well?
Yeah, there's actually, if you keep scrolling down, we'll get to it, but maybe we should tidy this up a little bit, because there is a reference to a Mass General law about refusal terminating water service, about people that are ill or have people, children in the house, things like that, so.
I would, just for optics, kind of include that with that statement.
Okay. You want to still relook at that 30 days? Section 1.
Once again, if we're not going to shut it off in 31 days, then we shouldn't be so
State that,
specific
yeah.
about it. Or provide the examples and under which we would be willing to, all of us at some point in our lives have just forgotten to pay the bill within 30 days. A bill within 30 days.
Do I have to keep getting up?
Well, it's only for the recording purposes, Kirk. I'm sorry. You may want to sit in the front row right now.
When a bill is in arrears, don't forget, we bill on a quarterly basis, at least that's what we're currently doing with Aquarian. So when a bill is in arrears, so the 30 days is kind of impractical.
Yeah. Right.
But here again, I question that there ought to be a notice provision. I mean, you can,
Right. I think we need to be more, again, less draconian and more,
Yeah.
have more optics around what the process
Well, the
would be.
aquarium bill came in for me the other day, maybe a week or so ago, and I think it had like a December 15th due date, but it came in my email like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So it gives you like 45 days to pay it.
Well, again, theirs was 45
It was
days.
45, yeah.
But I understand the town trying to be more
Cash flow.
consistent with other, and cash flow, but consistent with other areas. It just seems harsh.
Yeah, we only had a very brief conversation with this,
Okay.
with,
Yeah.
the group in the town hall.
Sure.
would it make sense, to look at what the sewer department does? And
Well, I was
be
just going to say
consistent
that
between the two?
what the discussion was is that the parallel would be what's done with the sewer department there. And not only in terms of timelines, but also arranging billings and kind of being more kinder, gentler than,
I think we need to be kinder and gentler here.
Yeah, agreed.
Frankly. Because in practical terms, we would be,
right,
right? Because we would. I mean, that's the nature of this town, is to work with folks.
yeah.
So,
Isn't it also true that a bill might not be paid because it's an abatement process? So you have the right not to pay it if you...
They go through the abatement process
Right.
later on.
right, some other.
I'm just reinforcing the statement here, that 30 days is kind of a moot point.
Well, this may help. We have a very easygoing, Rolf Yesterby, Water Commissioner. After prior notification to the customer or consumer of non-payment of a water bill, the water department has the right to shut off the water services to that customer. If shut off, the water services will be reinstated after full payment of the total due, including the additional fee, which is stated in the fee schedule for turning on the service. So basically, we have the right to shut it off after notifying them, and we don't have to, but we have that right.
Right.
And if we do shut it off, we will turn it back on, but they have to pay for the reinstatement.
And you don't even specify a number of days.
We do
in the-
not.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't
Thank
think-
you. Is your rules online?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Okay, so we get some good comments there. We'll bring back and discuss. Just to let you know the process from here, it's like, so we'll have these comments, we can start to incorporate them. We have to hear back from town council's comments, incorporate them again, and I think circle back with the town hall folks and see if they have any additional feedback based upon the new version that we'll have to issue, and then more than likely be back in front of you to discuss sort of a final draft before it enters into the public hearing process with the water commissioners, the selectmen.
Great.
Section 17 talks about the renewal
I have
of...
one more question.
Yep.
Sorry. Number 5 for vacancy. Should you put a time frame on that? What does that mean? So if the meaning is if it's,
If somebody goes away for half a year.
what's the definition of, a vacancy?
Okay, maybe I'll look into that.
Yep.
Okay, renewal of water service after I can't even say that word.
Sorry, can I just, one other comment on 10. You've got a section in here which talks about 3 or more violations of mandatory water use restrictions. And I think all of us have driven around our towns and seen willful violation of irrigation systems and whatever. And I wonder what policy the town ought to adopt and whether there's any teeth in what's here. If we are going to be up against the limit in terms of water withdrawals and whatever, is this something, and I know later on, there's fees and things that are,
Right.
that are specified. So to me, it's an issue for discussion Because this, I don't, has anyone ever been shut off because they've misused water during a irrigation period?
I don't know. I remember when it first rolled out, they did submit warnings, because I had neighbors that received warnings. I don't know if that's been done recently, though, at all.
No.
Because I think we all see
Yeah.
folks aren't paying as much attention as we like to it.
Yeah, and you just got to remember, too, that when a water system is in an emergency declaration and when they literally don't have water or any storage, there is times where you have to take the ultimate authority of going around and make sure, actually, if people are, when there's no water in the tanks and you have to shut people off, you have to shut people off. So we have to remember that very unique situation where that may occur. It did occur in a South Shore town a couple of years ago that they had to do that.
The teeth is in the fine, because you can't shut off water, because you're going to condemn the property, you can't live there, right? Board of Health requires, if you don't have water service, you can't live in the facility, you can't have domicile in the facility. So teeth is in the fine.
Which doesn't exist.
Which doesn't exist with Aquarian, because they didn't have the authority to do it. You do.
So I could have been watering my yard every day?
Could have been.
Well, yeah, that way.
Then you have to mow it once a week.
Yeah, that's a
so-
good point. Very good point.
Anything else? So renewal of after the service is shut off. This just kind of opens up the discussion about how to go about getting either a new application if it's been a while for a vacancy, or if you have to go back out and have the operator turn on the service itself. That's included within the fee schedule at the back. I just saw that the last sentence of that, the payment plan on overdue charges can be arranged as so desired. I'm going to just cross-reference that to make sure that that's consistent with the other billing section, so I'm going to circle and get back to that.
Where's that in 17, you said?
17, the last sentence.
Last
is 17.
payment, yeah, last.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yep. We crossed off turn on charge because it's already included in the rates, so there's no see a need to restate that. Section 18 is the establishment of rates. That's, one of the bigger sections that we've added in here to be crystal clear on. This is obviously a much different rate setting process than what Aquarian had to go through. So we wanted to set the process that the selectmen had set forth, developing the Citizens Advisory Board, and helping with the setting of rates and going forth through the public hearing process for that.
I had a question there because, and I frankly haven't gone back to look, but my understanding was that the Citizen Advisory Board would submit its recommended budget to the selectmen, and it would, the selectmen who would make the decision as to the budget and submit it to the town.
Correct.
And has that changed, or?
Nope.
So doesn't, this says in D, says by March of each calendar year, Citizen Advisory Board shall vote the budget and submit it and recommendation to the town meeting.
Well, I think before that, it's following the water superintendent in November submitting to the Citizens Advisory Board, and then they're conducting the public hearings, and then the selectmen essentially approve that. Well, I see what you're saying. It's between C and D there, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's out of order.
Yes.
Yeah. When you think about what the advisory committee does when they set the budget for the town, it's a process which ultimately the advisory committee is submitting the budget recommendation to the town. The selectmen don't actually run the budget for the town.
Okay.
But I would imagine, though, that in this case, we'd want it reversed. We'd
Well,
want
as the water
want
commissioners.
the water commissioner submitting the budget to the town based upon the recommendation from the Citizens Advisory Board, right?
Right. Kirk Schultz, Board of Health. The Citizens Advisory Committee is an advisory committee. They have no power.
Right.
Their votes have no authority.
Right.
Okay, so we'll look into that.
Now, logistically, what it doesn't mention things like, cost of service survey, which actually this committee will do after the first year of operation. We're going to help kind of kick that process off to do a cost of service study. I think that's what it's called, right?
Yes.
To help that process, the thought is that moving forward, though, they'll do those continually to, determine, what it does cost to provide the service to ratepayers. There we go. Yep.
I want to apologize. The Citizens Advisory Committee is incredibly powerful. Their opinions that they're going to draw from the 3 towns mean something. So what I meant to say, they do not have statutory authority. I didn't want it to belittle that group,
We understand. Thanks for
for
clarifying.
the homeowners.
Right.
Anything else on the rate setting process?
My sense is that over time, this is going to get modified as the process becomes, it may be either elaborated upon or further defined as we learn as a system what works best. And I'm thinking even more around the capital part of it, too.
We've, that water system that we worked on the Cape has been in service for 3 years, and we just finished our 3rd cycle of rules and regulation revisions. So it is a true statement that it's a living document. It's revised almost annually until you get very comfortable of how the town and its government's going to operate. And you're going to get feedback, additional feedback when you have a water superintendent that gets hired, you have an operator that gets hired.
Right.
They're going to have some feedback on rules and regulations too, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, Kirk Schultz, Hingham Sewer Commission. We go through the same process as you had mentioned, that in the springtime, we have capital outlay, and we have our capital budget. And our water rates, our sewer rates, we establish in the fall, 6 months later. Preliminary rate and then a final rate coming up. That gives you time to work with obtaining this money that has been provided to you, but you may not have actually obtained it.
Gotcha. Bills?
Bills.
Bills?
So we essentially started combining a couple sections into one. You'll see that bills for water service, and we just eliminated the term of payment and just kind of kept that a running section of bills for water service on page, as it goes into page 20. But we just wanted to make sure that this is, we did make a change to 30 days from receipt. That was a comment by one of the townspeople, that to be consistent with other town bills that go out. If you feel that's in error, then we can circle back to them and ask again on the 30 versus 45 days. I think your concern was mostly 30 days and then shut somebody off, rather than 30 days and have payment of a bill.
Is there any provisions being made for like electronic billing instead of this contemplates like hard copy billing is going to an address? Is there any e-billing functions or?
I believe there is. I'd have to double check the RFP, but I know there's been some questions asked about the keeping the online billing process, payments. Or
Did Aquarian charge interest on bills paid after whatever their time frame was? And do we do that with
Penalty?
Was there?
I don't know, I don't remember. I
Yeah,
don't
the-
think so. I've
The
never.
town will be charging interest for anything
Will.
over 30 days, yeah, at
Okay.
the standard.
Is that consistent with the
14%.
lighting company? 'Cause I think most people are going to kind of equate the two in terms of some practices, like billing.
It's certainly consistent with tax bills.
That's good, that's a good comparison.
You get interest,
Yep.
the day after they're due.
Okay.
Couple of highlighted sections in that is due to the fire service. So we wanted to hold off on discussion on that, the highlighted text.
In the section D, provided more than one meter, how often is there a dual meter? I mean, and what are they used for besides, the only reason I can see it is maybe irrigation, but What would the purpose for a dual meter be?
An example could be somebody who has 2 or 3 apartments within the same building.
Okay, and he's trying
We're
to,
not going to, I mean, the town is not going to bill each individual.
he's using that meter to build, he's taking his water mill,
Correct.
meter's $100, $33
You
per
get a bill
player.
for the
Okay,
property.
got it.
I've also seen properties like
But in that case, you're still charging, there's a minimum charge for each meter.
yes,
What-
yeah.
Is that just usage? Is that a rental? Is that,
Administrative fee / meter recovery fee, you know, if you're charging for the meter, it helps you recover the cost of the meter.
Capital recovery.
Right.
yeah, okay.
We can
But
look into that when we get down to the
Yeah.
rates, you know.
Yeah. Well, the reason I bring that up is like, I mean, if I mean, we're not gonna probably do it right away, but if you ended up, you know, the incentive for water conservation might be, if you have an irrigation system, put in a separate meter, and we won't penalize you we won't charge you that minimum fee each month, but then we can also kind of monitor in a drought condition that, hey, Jim's been watering his lawn, he's got 2 meters and both of them are spinning, right? And then you can find a fine right there, right? You know, if it's in the middle of August or whatnot, and there was a mandatory drought condition, you can actually kind of pinpoint some of the people that have been violating that particular condition.
Okay, I'll look into that. I added a note here to say, should that be applicable to irrigation meters as well?
Okay.
A mandatory meter for irrigation systems is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You can always tell who's using water in the summer.
Right.
We okay to move on to abatement?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just step through it step by step. Obviously, if anyone has any concerns with their water bill, they can enter into the abatement process. This process requires them to, an abatement request be made within 30 days of the date, of the billing date. It says here it has to be done in writing, and kind of discuss exactly what they're looking for an abatement process, and why they want an abatement. You can go if you like.
Abatements shall not be issued for water leaks. Right? It's the second sentence in there. That's what all the abatements are that Aquarian currently has for the most part, for water leaks or for water used for irrigation systems in which they had not installed an irrigation meter, in which they had previously installed an irrigation system. I think that we don't want to have abatements for water leaks that aren't the responsibility of the customer. And so, you know, water leaks, if somebody has a water leak, they didn't know about it, because, you know, customers are not engineers, and you determined that so many gallons of water was wasted, misused, it just seems appropriate that the customer would get the benefit of having that water cost abated from their bill because they didn't know about it. But the willful, the part we were talking about earlier, the willful misuse, then that's something I think that would apply. But I think that water leaks, you shouldn't have that. You know, that's too restrictive.
I hear, you know, I hear many stories about customers that have had large bills and determined there was a leaky toilet that they weren't aware of. And I know practically Aquarian has reduced their fee accordingly. So to Kirk's point, that this kind of doesn't read that way, that this indicates to me that we're going to charge based on water usage, period.
Even if you had a leaky
Even if
toilet.
you had a leaky toilet that
Yeah.
I can speak from personal experience. and it runs into several $100s for one toilet.
And the day of
Did you
the,
file an abatement?
Pardon?
Did you abate it, Tra-
No.
Okay.
You put willful neglect, you know, something like that.
so I don't know, from a practical perspective, what makes sense.
Yeah, I think we maybe want to just add something in there that says the leak potentially could be abated through this process. So, I mean, I don't think you
Right.
just want to say you're not going to be responsible for the leak, because
Right.
more than likely, you're going to pay for some of it. But
Right, exactly.
So maybe something that says, you know, that could potentially be abated based upon
Yeah,
a portion.
yeah.
Yeah.
General question I have here relates to paragraph B and E, and the way I read this, the abatement request goes to the town, however it's defined, and it's only if the customer is dissatisfied that you go to the water superintendent. It seemed to me that that ought to be flipped around from an administrative perspective, and you ought to be handling the initial abatement request at the lowest level, and the appeal would be at a higher level.
I agree.
That's D?
That's, it's B,
B?
B, Bravo, and Echo.
I guess the process there was that, the thinking there was that if they need to come and see somebody that they disagree with the decision that the water commissioners make, then the water superintendent is the person that's there every day that they can go see, I guess, is what we're trying to get through with that.
Well, that's right. I mean, to me, it would make more sense that the initial contact would be either with the water supervisor's office or with the operator's office, and that if the issue can't be resolved, then the water commissioners, I don't think you want the water commissioners involved in the initial filing of an
First line of
abate.
defense, yeah.
No.
Superintendent should hopefully be able to take care of 80% of that in that jurisdiction and not bog down the water,
Yeah.
or the select board right now, but that goes ultimately to the water commission.
Well, I guess it depends on how, I mean, are you going to give the superintendent authority to reduce someone's bill, though? I mean, that's the flip side of it. That's a little dangerous.
Well, you're just saying
That's a good
that
point.
the water superintendent would be the person to first evaluate the request, and then would make a recommendation to the water commissioners.
Right. That's how it typically goes, is that the superintendent will do all the due diligence with the staff and the operator, find, the you know, is it a meter error, is it, you know,
Right.
a leak, have all the documentation, provide a recommendation to the board, water commissioners.
That makes sense.
Some
Go
people
to the
might,
hearing, talk the case.
But this way, it sounds like it's the town, the water commissioners are doing it, so.
So in item B, the word "town" should be replaced with the water superintendent.
Right.
Yeah, I think so,
Okay.
too.
Yeah. And just briefly, that was my point at
And
the
then on
last
E,
meeting.
Right.
The
Oh, sorry.
lowest level, and the Board of Selectmen, in this case, they shouldn't be involved in these low-level decisions. And the last bit, it's the recommendation of the supervisor to the water board for the abatements.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
And
doesn't
then
go
in-
directly to the commissioners. It goes through a recommendation from the superintendent.
Yeah, please.
Rolf Yesemy, Cohasset Water. It's going to become an enterprise fund, so the enterprise fund has the final say on those rebates. So that's going to be the final arbiter of giving a rebate or not, because that's who holds the purse at the end of the day.
BWC has jurisdiction over the enterprise
But
fund,
that's,
right?
I believe that's the water commissioners.
If that's the water commissioner, yes.
So it would be the water
Yes.
commissioners,
Yeah.
It's
yes.
an enterprise.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a mechanical, just a process question? So is it anticipated that in B, that somebody on this water superintendent staff's going to go in the house and check these? Is that practical?
Potentially, I mean, the operator could, the water superintendent could direct the operator to investigate if it's, maybe if it's a remote read meter, you might be able to download any data that's on, for your water usage. If they're complaining about a leak, you could go inside the house and check if, you know, is it the leaky toilet that's running, and just try to help identify and help the homeowner identify what the answer and solution is to the high bill.
Because today, a representative of Aquarian will do that work, correct?
I assume so. I haven't
Yeah,
had
I
experience with
believe
that.
so. So in essence, the water operator will, is that part of the RFP? That's part of the responsibility?
It's responding to different requests and service calls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Every request doesn't have to result in an inspection.
Understood, I'm just,
Okay.
I'm just thinking about the plumbing inspector now. If you have, probably diving way too deep here, but I'm thinking of, I'm thinking of the operator walking in, you know, these, we just talked an hour ago about from the curb to the house, who owns what, right?
Yep.
Now you're saying if you have a dispute about leaks, you're asking these guys to go into a house and look at toilet, have they, you know, is that their,
Yeah,
is that their bailiwick?
they have these,
Okay.
the operators have a lot of, usually the distribution operators have a lot of experience with. Yeah.
Yep.
You can see that at the bottom of the abatement section, there was some text that was struck out as far as leak adjustments. You know, we might want to, I might want to revisit that, I guess, if you're having comments on,
Yeah.
you know, at the top there about, you know, essentially a leak is not, maybe, potentially could be abated, then maybe we should somehow define that.
I think that would be appropriate.
If the leak is on the downside of the meter, why would we abate it? Isn't that the responsibility of the homeowner?
Well, I think there's been a, again, for the leaky toilet situation,
Yeah.
that there's been an accommodation made. Now, you could probably argue that one wouldn't have to do that, but that's been the general practice of Aquarian, at least, is to work with the homeowner on, hey, your toilet leaked, you got it fixed, we're gonna, you know, take some money off the bill just because we're good partners in this. I think that's probably their stance. I mean, they could play hardball, but
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something we would necessarily want to do.
I guess it depends, big picture, on how much we want to enforce water conservation. I mean, if somebody's a repeat offender with never repairing their toilets, you might want to get more punitive.
I would love your perspective on,
We give one in the life of your toilet.
okay,
You give what?
In the life of your water system, one failure. If we agree that it's not your fault, we'll rebate, but if we don't agree, we don't.
okay, so,
But once it's given,
okay, so just for the purposes of the recording, the Cohasset kind of gives one strike. They give you like a one strike rule if it's a leaky
if we agree that it was not,
toilet and they agree that it wasn't the homeowner's fault, then they'll typically work with the homeowner. But a second time, it's fully on the homeowner's responsibility. Written fair.
Revisiting
So
the
if-
one-time language seems appropriate.
Yeah. I would agree.
so.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott.
So if you do, like, if you do find it's a leaky toilet, and you've agreed to the abatement, do you ask for proof of that new toilet being, or the toilet fix? It may not be a new toilet, but, you know, it could be new guts or whatnot, or do you just kind of go on the assumption that that homeowner is going to do it, and you give them the rebate before that?
Yeah, why don't you come up now?
They have to file a written abatement, or a request for abatement, and we do the research with our staff out in the field, and then it comes to the board. We try to negotiate, we try to find out what happened with the situation, and then as a board, as a committee, we vote whether or not we agree that that's a rebatable event.
Okay.
How many abatement requests do you receive a year, do you think?
15?
Okay.
I mean, it's not,
Yeah, it's not that.
Not as big.
well, no, but I,
Now, clearly, it's going to be double or triple that number. How many residences do you serve in Cohasset?
We have about 2,600.
2,600.
customers, yes.
And what's the number of the system?
15,000.
Yeah, so
A
we're
lot,
5 times
significantly more.
larger, so we're
Yeah.
talking
it's,
maybe 100.
75, yeah, to 100.
75 to 100 a year, so it's going to take up a lot of folks' work, and clearly the
does take time.
water commissioners / superintendents don't want to be on.
And I would just argue that the language that's been deleted here,
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile keeping it in, because it gives you a standard, and it's something, it's a frame of reference from which you can work. And there's enough dollars, I think, involved in some of this stuff, where if you've got to go ahead and go through the process each and every time, administratively, it may be very difficult.
And if it's a request, and let's say it's a $1,000 bill, and the regular rate was $200 for that quarter, then if we agree it's a rebatable, we'll rebate the $800, the difference. That's it. Thanks.
Kirk Schultz, Hingham Sewer Commissioner. We get about 8 abatement requests per meeting, and we meet 4 to 5 times a year.
Okay.
And so I realize it's a little different. Ours could be for other aspects as opposed to just water use. But leaky toilets, you know when your toilet's leaking, right? The homeowner's alerted to that. So typically the water leaks in which you're going to get your abatement or the drywall screws that go into the water line that nobody knows is leaking. But a leaky toilet, and you just let that go, that's something different.
Yeah, you should, yeah, I agree.
I've seen some pretty
Bad situation.
bad situations,
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. Great, so you'll work on that then?
Yes, yeah, we'll bring that, circle that back around to some of the
Perfect.
town.
Thanks.
Any more on abatement? Okay, theft of service. Essentially just, if we find someone is stealing water without a meter, without signing up for water, this kind of gives the town the teeth to, there's a theft of service charge at the end of the rules and regulations. And essentially it allows them to make sure that they have to go through the new application process or put a meter in if they've taken it out, that they were a customer already. So this is just a quick section that states that.
This seems to be an awfully light response to a deliberate theft of water, and I would think at a minimum, if it's found that a customer is receiving water without a meter, the first thing to do is cut off the service. I don't know whether you can do it legally or not, but that was just a personal reaction.
Well, especially if it's pretty wanton, like if somebody puts a bypass around their meter, that's theft of service, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that's grounds for cutoff.
Well, I guess thinking about this again too, is that situation where someone either installs the meter backwards on purpose, or, I don't want to say out loud the things to cheat the code.
Right.
But, or puts, a pipe around the meter. At the end of the day, they're a customer that needs water, and, if they've remedied the situation and have paid the essentially fee for doing that, they still have to receive water service. If you take them off the water system and they don't have any other means of providing potable water to their home, then I think that, I don't know if you're allowed to do that through Mass General law.
Many regulations have a provision for theft, criminal acts, in which the town, and I believe we probably have a bylaw, has the authority to go through the the civil court system to recoup those, to recoup that money. And I know that's, we have that in the many Board of Health regulations.
Yeah, maybe a line around that, around teeth, adding some teeth to this. Hey, if we catch you cheating, we're going to take all applicable and legal remedies to, including, legal, however you want to define it.
Practically speaking, have we actually seen cases of this on an annual basis, or I don't know how it plays out in Cohasset?
Oh, I'm sure it happens.
Are we addressing a 1 in a million incident, or
Tapping right into the main.
you see it?
Directly into the main.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Right. What are you thinking?
How do people do that? I mean, that's pretty clever.
The
but they get caught.
The one you see, the lot is
Not always,
tapping
but
the
they-
service line before the meter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
right, okay.
again, we don't want to give away too much.
No, I think some teeth in this would, at least, not that anyone's ever gonna read these rules and regs, but having teeth in there, I think would be important to.
I'll double check. And Kurt, you said in the sewer commission rules and regulations, there's something in there? Okay.
Yeah, and I'll see which is the best, most appropriate.
All right, section 22 on pressure and continuity of supply essentially just tells people that the goal, obviously, of the water system is to provide appropriate pressure and water for daily service, but also for fire service. But there's times where, you know, a pump's down or tank's offline for painting or things like that, that may cause some disruptions or pressure changes. This is just kind of covering that for the town.
May I just, case in point. And I apologize for getting up so often, but this is my opportunity.
You're getting your steps in, Kirk.
I'm getting my steps. I got my phone on me. It's when the operator is delegated authority and a responsibility by the town. So when I see town and operator, whenever I see operator, I'm inclined to suggest that you strike that out. It's really the town's responsibility. And then when you've delegated a certain procedure to the operator, use the capital O, operator. But I just think that, here it's confusing now, town and operator, so they both have to sign off on that. I just think that the operator is a subset of the town.
Would some of this be addressed if we took Jim's earlier suggestion, which was the town is restated as the operator, which is essentially what we're saying, or the town?
That was about many towns.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You already have a different.
We can just simply strike, yeah. We can just simply strike "and operator" for those two instances in the section. I think that'll appease.
Hard to piece me.
22C, can you just quickly, what would that situation arise to? What is a regulating device? How would they get at that? Where would it go? Does that need to be approved?
Generally speaking, I think anything over 80 pounds, 80 psi per plumbing code requires a pressure reducing valve. The optimum pressure, I think, is anywhere around 50 to 65 psi. So I think that's just kind of stating that, the town's stating that there could be instances where there's high pressure in low-lying areas of town. It's not their responsibility that there's high pressure. It's beyond the homeowner if they don't want the high pressure, because it can have impacts to internal plumbing, washing machines, dishwasher, things like that.
That's spelled out in just the regular Mass plumbing code, so.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Kirk Schultz, Hingham Board of Health. Concerned of number of D, and I don't know how the town will reserve sufficient supply under pressure and continuity of supply for those entities. If we're in a situation like that, we're in a more significant section of the regulation than pressure. We're reserving sufficient supply for health, fire, sanitary requirements. It's just an odd point. I don't think it's needed in here, and it can be restated in another section with more teeth.
I thought that was inventory management, possibly with the water tower.
Yeah, I think it's meant to say that they could, essentially the town can hold back on providing all its available pressure to the, if they have to shut a storage tank to keep the water in there because there's an emergency, that would reduce the pressure around that tank in that vicinity of wherever the customers are. That, I take that as that situation is just sort of saying that the water system can do what it needs to do to protect and maintain the provision of water and for service and for fire.
I stand corrected.
We all set to move on to water conservation?
Yes.
We're almost at the finish line. Water conservation restrictions, honestly, we compared this versus the, some of the other water conservation restriction that are being imposed by Mass DEP through the Water Management Act process with other public water suppliers. And I believe this stemmed from Aquarian was under a notice of, was under a consent order to implement these water use restrictions. We checked them versus some other towns and thought that they were fine and really didn't need many modifications at all.
Well, I do have one concern, and that is, at least under the drought restrictions in Part B, why don't we consider a fine for a second violation? Because we seem to have no teeth in the violation of water usage during droughts if people are out there, doing wanton irrigation.
Okay, we can look at that.
I mean, would that make us unique?
No.
Okay.
The fines and warnings are town-by-town basis.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll publicly state it, and I've heard instances, or it's perhaps hearsay, that people say, I'll pay the fine, I don't care, it doesn't cost me that much. So, I mean, we need a fine with teeth in it.
Yes.
That music to your ears?
It is.
Kirk?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Kurt.
Yeah, the Masters Water Management Act has two provisions for conservation. One is the calendar provision, which Aquarian selected to use, which is written in these regulations that came from Aquarian's regulations. And the other is stream flow assessment, based on real-life environmental situations. And we do have a stream flow gauge at the Union Street Bridge for the Weir River. Certainly, the annual conservation is what most towns select, if not all towns. The stream flow, to me, is a better assessment, but I think that having the ability to revisit this at some future date would be beneficial.
The only comment I can have on that is most of the time, towns do select a calendar-based approach because it's less confusing for the public. They know the date it's going to happen, they know the date it's going to end. The stream flow, you may not have to impose the restrictions until the stream drops below a certain amount or height of depth of flow. You could always pull back the restrictions after either the flow is restored above a certain height or not, but it can get very confusing on is it on, is it off, is it on, is it off? And the fact that, dealing with some clients who may not tend to be checking the gauges, once a week or once a month, is another story in itself. But so most of the time, most towns, Kurt's right, go with the calendar-based approach.
And it seems like Aquarian's taken the stance in the past few years of immediately having the restrictions in place, implementing the restrictions each year.
Oh, it's required,
It's required by,
mandated
for them.
in their way,
Yes,
self-imposed.
right. So the town will have flexibility around that. Yes.
Typically, the water system has to file with Mass DEP if they implement a water restriction. There's a form that you fill out and have to submit it. And so they get notified and they keep track of what towns, or public water systems, have implemented.
In the drought restrictions under B, it refers to any declared or confirmed drought. And what that's referring to is that the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, which includes DEP, actually has a drought management task force that meets regularly, I think almost monthly during summer periods anyway, if not, and throughout the year. And they evaluate what the status is of aquifers on a aquifer by aquifer basis. And they're the ones who declare what the status is. of the aquifer and whether a drought whether it's in drought status, and therefore that is the driver for kicking in the drought restrictions that are here.
Gotcha. Great.
That's not something the town would do, or
Well, the town can
water
do it if they
company.
have a drought management program that is equal to or exceeds what the state requires.
Okay.
Kirk Schultz, member of the Hingham
Water
Water
Supply.
Supply Committee. The declared drought was one of the reasons that the first iteration of the irrigation system bylaws went down, 2006, where the state, the state didn't have a system of declaring drought, which it does now, as Mark has mentioned. You know, that's fairly new. That's about 10 years or 12 years. It didn't have that years ago. And so the thought of the Board of Health declaring a drought, or someone declaring a drought for the irrigation systems, was concerning to most. And so, you know, there could be some language in there that, you know, state declared drought. I don't know what a confirmed drought is. That would be helpful for these regulations for municipal irrigation systems. Again, my hope is, down the road, that we would have a irrigation system bylaw that covers both municipal supplied irrigation systems and private well supplied irrigation systems, in which the regulation would change. And we would have, as you just mentioned, a town system for declaring that drought, clearly identified the differences between what the municipal irrigation system owners would be able to do relative to what the well water owners would be able to do, and they're certainly not going to be the same. There's going to be an offset there. But I'd like to see that down the road, and I think that working towards that is a valued goal of the town and the committee.
Thank you.
I put in my notes here on a level 2 mandatory total ban. Potentially even the first violation could be a fine, not just the second, you know, if there is if there's actual drought and emergency.
Good point.
I'll look into that, maybe look into a couple other towns and see what they have for fees.
Yeah, for violation and subsequent. Fine.
And on level 1, it'll stay warning, fine, or...
Yep. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yep.
Yep.
With increasing fines,
Yep.
Yeah.
Escalating fines.
Do you mind telling us what the fines are? Rob, do you mind telling us what the fines are? Maybe you could...
Yes, right now, first is 50, and then it's relatively small, and then a $100 each subsequent violation.
And that's where most people say, so what?
So Cohasset has $50 initially for the first fine, and then $100 each subsequent.
It's another bill,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, so Cohasset has a system that each subsequent fine is $100. So it's a uniform fine. In the sewer regulations, for someone who willfully connects their sump pump into a storm drain and doesn't repair that situation, right? We can't mandate that. Right now, we have a $200 fine per year. And what we've recommended, and it's in our regulations now, it's on the website, is the fine is doubled every year until it's corrected. So that's better.
For some pumps connected to the sewer,
That's for storm.
to storm drains. okay.
Should be
Sometimes connected to
Sewer.
sewer.
Sewers.
Yeah.
Okay,
And you can't connect it to a storm drain.
right.
I misspoke. But it's the exponential doubling. Which is insane.
Any other feedback on the,
And I guess you have a separate fee schedule, because you talk about fines,
Yes, on the back.
and that's where
In the back.
that issue came.
great. Are we good on the conservation? Any other feedback? Great. Water balance?
Okay, water balance. Not sure how much you talked about this last meeting, but generally, it's for a new or expanded service, over 100,000 gallons per year. What we did for this rules and regulations is take sort of Aquarion's version of it, put it within the rules and regulations, so it wasn't this separate document that was floating around somewhere. And we also, at the end of this rules and regulations that you have tonight, way at the back in the appendix is the actual worksheet that you have to fill out associated with that new application. Process kind of, you have to apply for a new service if you think your usage is over a certain amount. You can either just accept the Title V flows, which is usually a lot higher than what you would actually use for water, or you can, essentially, you'd have to put a deposit down and prove to them that your water usage should be lower, which may or may not exempt you from going through this water balance.
Just for the
steps.
purposes of the folks watching at home, can you describe the intention of the water balance program, why it's in place?
It's essentially meant to offset any additional demands on the water system from a new development or expanded use of a property, commercial development. So if, the Ryan Tran supermarket comes in and wants to put in this huge, facility that uses lots of water, they have to provide an offset or payment to this fund that would essentially help allow the town to use those funds for water saving purposes, replacing plumbing fixtures, replacing old toilets in different buildings, or for residents, doing rebate programs, a lot of different water conservation measures that they can go about to help offset that increase in water usage from that new customer. Okay.
And just another clarification perhaps for the people listening in. Give me an example of where 100,000 gallons per year compares to an average homeowner. I mean, is it magnitudes larger or not much larger?
No, I think a typical home can use around 65 to 70 gallons per person per day. So if you have like a three-person household, you can use around 70 to 75,000 gallons per year, is my guess for a standard three-person household. So if you have, you might be on I think they set it at 100,000 gallons, because if you have a four-person family, you're probably on just under about 100,000 gallons per year is my guess.
And if you're irrigating, probably more.
Potentially more, yeah.
Okay.
This section was one in Bravo 1. It says residential development, single service connection, and this 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom thing, and residential development is not defined. And similarly, in Delta 6, where the applicant must provide a deposit of part of the application, I don't know whether it's clear enough in terms of who falls into what category, and whether, at what point someone falls under the preliminary deposit obligation. So, just something to look at, I think, as far as definitions.
I'll let him finish his notes. Is D a fairly standard part of water balance programs? I mean, to me, it kind of read as a highly impractical approach, because if I understand it correctly, it says somebody coming in that has a large water request is going to direct others how to conserve their water so that they have their own.
What section are you referring to?
D, applicant-directed conservation. Is my interpretation correct?
When Mark mentioned this earlier, when the water conservation program was originally established by Aquarion, most of the municipal buildings in Hingham didn't have water conservation fixtures. And so an applicant could go into the schools and say, I'm going to, replace X number of your toilets as part of the trade-off that I need to do for the water balance. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to find those locations, but, you know, it's a remnant of the program. It's up to the applicant to decide which is appropriate. If he or she can find, you know, an offset like that, then
Do they really have the power, though, or control over other people's use of water in order to offset their own? I guess that's my major concern.
the power comes from the replacement of those units, again, within the school, that we know what that savings would be. And the school would, you know, agree to have this, these water fixtures replaced as part of the arrangement between the contractor and whatever entity that they are approaching, and it could be a, you know, private entity, for water-saving features. Again, 20 years, 1999, 20 years later, that's less practical compared to the water
Well,
bank.
could a developer come in and say, I would like to, you know, build this development, and in return, I'm going to ask every resident in this town to replace their toilet with a low-flow toilet, and do they have the right to have that happen?
Right, but the developer would have to pay for the replacement.
No, even if they agreed to pay, I mean, would citizens actually agree to that?
You know, if they did, it would be counted towards the water balance program.
They could make that offer.
They could make the offer, okay.
Take them up on it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that, I would see this with the larger developer coming in and having more cloud, you know, having their own private engineer, and not essentially someone that has a small subdivision, but that could come in and choose this direction of direct conservation instead of the water banking aspect. I think it would be, they could find that cheaper if they have their own plumber that could go and do the work instead of following the fee schedule and providing this huge check to add to the water bank funds that the town would then use to offset that. So that's how I read these two different sections. Essentially, it gives the applicant two different ways that they could go about
Okay.
the process.
Water banking is like buying pollution credits on the emission side of things.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. Within the water bank, I just read through the sections. It certainly is managed by the town. It managed by the superintendent of the town, the water superintendent. That element should be written, I think, within the regulation, who is in charge of the bank, and that they are responsible to provide the water commissioners with an audit on the funding of the bank on an annual basis or semi-annual basis. And that's a very significant program, and the operations of that program we're entrusting into the superintendent under the auspices of the water commissioners. And it'll be great to see the town run the program in the future.
Thank you.
I noted those recommendations, and we'll look into that.
Okay.
Thank you. So let me just wrap my arms around the cost of this. So I'm Alliance, they built that big development on Beale Street. Walk me through from a practical perspective how that would work and kind of what size check they'd be writing, and then conversely, how a system would utilize those funds.
So the way I read this section, the applicant could either do the direct conversation method of just offsetting whatever uses they would be, water use they'd be taking from the system through a method that they could identify, like town buildings or schools or other
Right,
means.
so let's assume that most of those, that low-hanging fruit's been utilized.
So, yeah, so if they go through the water banking process, it looks like in here that there's a rate of $10 per gallon per day, which, could do the math on, that would be essentially a payment they'd have to make to the water bank based upon that fee.
And is that $10 per gallon per day, is that fairly standard?
This is not entirely common, at least in our experience in Massachusetts. So this is a little unique to...
To what was in place before?
Right.
In what way? How is it unique?
There's not many towns that go to this extent to have a water bank. So it's a great water conservation to help control development and rising demands.
I mean, what's the infrastructure around it to monitor it? Like, it seems like a pretty heavy-duty administrative burden to...
It's a separate fund, has to be made.
Yes, yeah, it had to be a separate account.
Huge
Yeah.
cash flows, right?
So this provides the town with the ability to modify that charge for larger developments, right? 10,000 gallons per day, I'm not sure what that probably equates to, a couple hundred people in a, right, you said 60 or
Right, I
70
mean-
gallons a day, so.
That could be a $100,000 payment that the developer would have to make to this bank if it's 10,000 gallons per day.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So that would imply that we would have to make provisions in the town for a water bank governance or whatever.
Well, there's already one in place, and I'm not sure what the bank size is presently that Aquarian manages. There certainly has been a lot of development in Hingham, which I'm sure developers have written checks for in the last.
There is a separate account today for all the money that's been paid into the water bank. My understanding is that is going to come to the town
As
for the
part of the
purchase of the water
acquisition.
system. And as far as the administration of it is concerned, I think Kirk's made a good point. It should be clear who's responsible for managing that fund, that there isn't, an audit every year, which is really going to be the responsibility of the Board of the Water Commissioners to perform to.
And is there a spending requirement, or can that bank effectively be built up and utilized however the water commissioner sees fit?
Well, the intent is that it gets spent on conservation measures, but the how, who, and when is not that closely defined,
Yeah.
is my understanding. Is, there's flexibility,
Yep.
in this case, on behalf of the town, as to how those funds are used.
So they could basically say, they could provide a menu of options for a homeowner. We will reimburse you if you change out your old toilets for new toilets, or whatever it is, right? That's the kind of usage that we're seeing, is that right?
That's an example of one, but there are
Right.
many others, again,
Right.
such as the type that Kirk described,
Yep.
the monies are used to upgrade fixtures in public buildings.
Yep.
Maybe there are other applications. Could it be used to replace a water main that has a history of leaks, perhaps?
Yeah.
And also for leak detection surveys that are done to discover those. So this bears a lot more discussion among the town
Yep.
and really the selectmen too, as to the policies that they want to apply to this. But I would think that they would want to intentionally keep it flexible in
Right.
terms of how they use this, because the pressures on the system are going to change over time, and you want to be able to respond to those with that, so.
Do you have any idea what the current account balance is and the number of dollars you might see in a given year? I mean, I guess it varies with development.
I don't know what it is. And I know that the administration was looking to get that balance, but I can't tell you what it is now.
No, I mean, your comment about flexibility, where you can supplement the capital budget to the extent that there's significant dollars or the other uses. So to the extent we put wording in, I fully agree, flexibility is
Yeah.
hard.
Remind me about I&I and the sewer, the comparison. The water bank is a significant amount of money being held. Again, a project, it's over $100,000 that will be going into this particular bank for some of the larger units in Hingham. The management of this account has been within Aquarion's domain and really had no public oversight. Some of the things that Aquarion used the money for, and by the way, the account is a compilation of all the towns within their Massachusetts Service A and Service B, within the account. And so one of the things that they had spent the money on was a report of their system and looking at conservation measures or potential conservation measures. I forget the researcher's name out of Western Mass. Vickers, Amy Vickers. And at the time of the water bank's funding, the Vickers report was going to drain the account by half. You know, the report was going to be over $100,000, $120,000. Currently, and so what happened was Aquarion eliminated Part B of the Vickers report. So Part A was done for about 65 grand, and the second part was not done. Currently, what Aquarion has is a customer rebate program. So the money that is in the bank, if you want to go out and purchase a new toilet, you can get on the list for available. You want to purchase a dishwasher and washer machines, those items that use a lot of water, typically your washer machines and your dishwashers. And if you want to remove the irrigation system from your property, you're going to get $2,000 in rebate or enticement from the water bank for that particular purpose. So they have a number of criteria. And what I like about what Mark said was this is policy on how that is run. It's been something that has not been clear in the past. And it's been disheartening not to know where this money is going to. And so to have the town manage it brings it into the sunlight, which is great. But I like Mark's idea that, and we do it with the Sewer Commission, that a portion of this may go towards a leak detection, we would call it an I&I program on the sewer side, in which a set amount would go towards replacing or determining where the leaks are within the system, because that would be, it's a expense, annual expense to the thing, but to have it within this program as a certain percentage shows that we are dedicated to it, number one, and then second, well, we're dedicated to that process, I think. And so I've spoken a lot about the water balance program. I love the fact that we have this written up. Again, I think the policies should be determined by the water superintendent at a future date and how it's being managed. Again, with Aquarion, they only use one plumber. And so because they have the restriction on the single plumber can only get so much done in a given year, that is the backflow of applicants that can't utilize the fund. And so, you know, they didn't want to change. And so hopefully the town will have a more open process. Thank you.
Thank you. Does Cohasset have a water system? That's a...
We have quite the leak detection system where we have our guys always going out when they have down.
Leak detection, yeah. Oh, great.
It's taken a while.
Yeah.
Still a lot of questions going on.
Does that include checking leaks on the customer side of the
Those don't
service?
count. It's only those don't count.
Those don't count, okay.
Our one of counts.
Yeah.
And that's why the meters should go on there, the meters between.
Yeah, do you mind? Yeah, this is important information. Thank you.
Having the meters closer to the street affords us the availability of seeing where the water's going. Because if the meter is just in front of the house, or at the house and it's several hundred feet away, if that pipe's broken from the street to their house, no one knows.
Right.
You may see something bubbling up occasionally when it's really, really wet out there, but a lot of times it just goes.
Yeah, it gets absorbed. Yeah,
Yep.
great. Thank you.
Anything else in the water balance program?
Did you write this?
No, it was taken a lot from Aquarion's document.
You did a lot of it.
It was mostly taken from Aquarian, but what we wanted to is put it here in front of everybody and within the regulations so that it wasn't this separate document outside that, we had trouble finding even, so.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Yeah, it's good to see it here.
Thank you.
So we have interruptions in water supplies, the next section, section 25. Essentially just letting the people know that, hey, water main breaks happen. Different changes, they reserving a right for public fire service. That was the incident I said before about sometimes you have to do some things to shut water off in certain areas for a water main break or if there's a fire or other things. I think that section's pretty self-explanatory. Kind of carries over into liability of the town. The one thing we did add into this section was that, when we do have a water main break, the town will endeavor to try to put something on the webpage, or if there's enough time, do like a reverse 911 to the area that's being impacted by water service. But I think that they're trying to say here that because of that, they're not liable. If it's, usually when you re-energize a water main after it's been off, there's, air can get in the line and you can get a little bit of like a water hammer, and the air needs to escape somewhere, and it usually finds the worst place to go. So sometimes it can impact people's inside plumbing if the air's not bled off appropriately when the system's turned back on again. And then lastly, just some general comments to finish up that really didn't have a home anywhere else in the rules and regulations, and so they were put in the last section here. I'm not sure how much we want to get into rates tonight or not. There's generally remaining, we've been told that just to leave them as is for now, that there's no implication right now that they're going to be modified during the transition, that they'd be identified and reviewed, I guess, when the town takes over within the first year,
Yeah.
doing the cost of service.
The town made a commitment to keep the rates the same as Aquarian was charging for the first year.
So this is the area where I had a couple of general questions.
Yeah.
I was surprised as I looked at these, that the residential water rate was higher than commercial and industrial. Tax rates are all the same, and I wondered if you could give any sort of a rationale or background with regard to the thought process in coming up with this. I don't want to talk specific numbers, but just conceptually.
I guess all I can say is, what we see as more typical in water systems is that it's uniform rates for all users, and there is a ascending block rate structure where the more water you use, the higher the rate you pay. That's actually part of a requirement in DEP's permits for water systems. From time to time, you do see rates that are different for commercial industrial users than residents, although I can't even think of a town where that's done. But I have the same reaction as you, that, why would residential rates be higher than commercial rates?
Although to the extent that there's any meaningful change, then the industrial and commercial communities within the towns are, so, well, that's for a different day.
Yeah, I think that will be handled down the road at some point.
Then I had the general question, because here, you've got a differentiation on the rates. You've got public fire protection, sale for resale was not mentioned, and a discussion about how you differentiate between residential, industrial, and commercial, whereas the rules and regulations right now don't address that. So that's why I had raised that question. There's another one on page 32, where I don't understand the genesis of the numbers. You're talking almost $400,000 for Hingham, $225,000 for Hull, small amount for Cohasset. And keeping in mind that with these rules and regulations, where over time, the hydrant replacement is going to change the percentage, the relative percentage of ownership between the towns. So when the numbers are looked at, it would be useful to understand, number one, where they're coming from, to get up to this quantity of dollars, and then make sure that the changes, that the regulations that we're going to look at are ones that are going to remain consistent as the hydrant program changes over time. And maybe you just amend it every 2 or 3 years. Don't know.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is I think everyone has some general questions about this, just in general, going forward. I don't really know how the hydrant conversation is going to go. So that's one question, just on the ownership level of it, and how fire service in general will be treated for not only Hingham, but for the other towns. But as far as the rates go, we'll really get into those numbers, I think, once during the first cost of service study.
Then, I think my last comment of many, on the surcharges page, which is 36, did I understand that this is basically going to get eliminated? If we're going to start from scratch with regard to a rate structure, then is there a need for these surcharges, or were these surcharges essentially intended almost as a cost of service adjuster or something?
I think that the surcharges are what many water systems refer to as a base fee. So regardless of how much water you use, or even if you use no water, there's a certain amount of costs associated with simply maintaining the water system. That's how I interpreted the surcharge program here. So every bill you get.
Whereas on page 30, the title is service charge, which
Okay.
I thought was intended to basically, now whether that accounts for just, well, it says all general water service customers. So I didn't understand the distinction between page 30 and page 36.
Okay, right. I was referring to the service charge as opposed to the surcharge. And honestly, I don't know what the difference is between the two.
And the other issue is that on the surcharge page, as you'll note here, that there was a surcharge relative to the water treatment facility lease, as well as the water treatment plant operations. And that was because when the plant was built, the DPU allowed allowed all of it to be passed on to ratepayers over the course of a very long period of time at a very high dollar amount.
Sort of an amortization fee?
Yes, so effectively, the plant was built for, let's call it $35 million, and the DPU allowed Aquarian to recapture over $100 million of that from ratepayers over the life of the water treatment plant. So once the town assumes ownership, that will be eliminated, but it is part of the rate structure today.
Yeah.
So there's, I think there's discussion around how that's going to be reflected in the bills. And then prospectively, how will that, because the town is effectively obligated to collect the revenue that they anticipate, some of which are these surcharges. So.
That goes back to David's point earlier about the general fund to keep the light, keep it operational or updated, right?
Right, so there's going to be decisions as to how that's reflected in future rates and how it's going to be reflected in the bills, because technically, we're no longer paying these surcharges for the use of the water treatment facility. So that's yet to be determined. But in any case, we're paying it today. We'll continue to pay it for a year, and then we'll kind of figure out how it looks on the bills.
The CWB, whatever it's called, would have the jurisdiction of setting the rates and the structure behind those rates?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, the water commissioners will effectively, and that's one of the complicated parts of this whole thing, is that we need to make sure that we're collecting the revenue that we need to run it, right? And then we set forth in the budget. It's a little bit complicated. So I know that there's been some experts brought in to kind of help the town ensure that, in fact, the rates they're going to charge generates the revenue that's anticipated for the plant. And then, of course, as I mentioned, after year one of operation, we'll be doing a cost of service to help inform the board as to kind of future rate setting.
Service charges are your fixed income coming in for use of the...
Right, the service charge is the fixed income, and the surcharges are kind of above and beyond in certain cases that have been approved by DPU in the past, but technically will go away, but represents some revenue today. Kirk?
Yeah, just on page 35, based on tonight's discussion, water conservation violation fee would be added, the amount to be determined. I don't know if you want to break that up for just water vacation on the calendar year violation versus the drought restriction violation. Make certainly the drought restriction a more hefty fine. An abatement application fee, you're going to get inundated with abatements unless there's a process, a formal process that people would need to follow. And by having a fee, it puts legitimacy into that. It needs to be a small amount. People have the right to apply for an abatement, but, just make it serious.
The first year of operation, though, we can't institute anything that we come up with today, though, right?
Sorry?
We can't add to the current rate structure,
Do anything you want.
not in the first year, though.
You could have what you're at.
I believe we could add these incidental fees.
Well,
Adding fees,
But they're not part of
populating
the-
the amount might be something.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So we can determine what these fees are, raise, lower them, whatever is appropriate.
The rates themselves
But the water usage rates
cannot.
will not be changed.
Got it. Okay.
And then of course, the terms of the payment needs to be consistent with what's reflected elsewhere in the rules. So you said 30 days there rather than 45. And then you have the specifications for everything. I don't know if that's anything that we can really opine on, unless people have questions on it.
Yeah, we can take comments now or at the next meeting, but they're generally just technical specifications about design of the pipes, hydrant spacing, valve placement, the way, the direction the valve should open, service materials, things like that.
And were these already in Aquarians?
No, we created these independently.
Best practices? Or?
Yes, yeah, and during one of our conference calls, just ask some questions about Aquarian to be consistent with what kind of materials they use in the system.
The only question on the specification that I would, or recommendation I would have is that, offer more than, like in high-density polyethylene, you've got Driscoll plexes or an approved equal. Provide 2 or 3 people, because you're really steering the business towards Driscoll flex, in my opinion, by only listing one manufacturer. If you list 2 or 3, then it at least levels the playing field. And do that for everything all the way through would be my recommendation.
I think the complicating factor here is spare parts and compatibility.
Yeah.
And if you've got standards, then that's easy. And that's one of the questions in my mind about the RFP process. And you're bringing someone in.
Yeah.
and You've got spare parts and inventory, you've got new spare parts. If you're expanding your system.
I get that, but I mean, I also think that, you know, by offering a couple different options, then you at least have the ability to drive, or keep costs at a minimum.
agree.
Whereas you got one manufacturer and you're going to only do him, the cost could go up. So, just just an idea.
Yep.
Is there any issue here with regard to consistency between the RFP process and what's said there, what the obligations are that are set forth, and particularly the specs that are here?
It's kind of a loaded question. All I can say is the regulations are in draft form, and I think by the time that we enter into the process of the public hearing process, we'll probably would take in going through this, we'll take a close look at the RFP to make sure things are consistent across the board.
We've made an effort to make sure that it is completely consistent with the RFP, but also keep in mind that these regs are going to be reviewed by town council, same town's council that prepared the solicitation for the system operator, to make sure that there is consistency. And these rules and regs are going to be, the procurement for the system operator, leading into your next agenda item,
Right.
actually, is going to be probably concluded before or pretty close to the time that we hope to conclude these rules and regs. So there's going to be time to make sure that they are consistent.
And is it typical that the system operator will review and have some input on these as well? Potentially, the system operator?
Oh, yeah, yep.
Yes, especially the, yes,
When you say the regs, you're not just referring to the specifications.
No.
You're talking about the regs
Yes.
overall. Yeah, absolutely.
And then, the only other thing in here that, how do we handle the dig safe process?
that's within the RFP, that's, the operator has to
Is that
respond to markouts.
Part of, is that typically part of the rules and regs that we're requiring a homeowner to participate in that service if they're, digging in the area, we don't want them hitting a
Gas main or...
Fiber optic, you never want to hit the fiber optic.
Whatever it is. I'm just,
Or some section with regard to role and obligation of the operator, and make reference to the operating agreement between the town and the operator, and say that they shall operate in accordance with the requirements, or something like that.
Yeah, I can add in something to the new service application about construction and notifying dig safe.
okay.
Most contractors should know that, right? Right, but we should put it in.
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
want the homeowner, if they're doing it themselves, not to.
Mr. Chairman?
Kirk?
I'm just going to get in the weeds just for a second, because there
Love
was a
it.
significant issue that came before the Board of Health. I do not see within the regulations that a water supply has to be 90 degrees from the main to the frontage of the property, which Aquarian currently has as a requirement. So that means there has to be a main in front of that property, 90 degrees to the center of the property. You don't have it in here, you're allowing for angles. Cool. Kind of a gentle welcome.
And then, of course, you've got the example of the water balance application. Does anyone have any feedback on these addendums? Addendi?
I didn't understand the point of the email at the back.
Oh, maybe it was not supposed to be there. Hold on, what is that? Oh, I think, yeah, I think that was inadvertently included in your copy. You want to rip that off and give it back to those guys? Yeah.
I don't think it's anything to do with it, right?
Yeah.
I think it's another town.
No, I didn't.
I didn't have it in mind, so.
You picked up something off the copier. I didn't read
Somebody
it.
printed.
I didn't read it.
Anything else to add?
Anyone have anyone else in this?
No.
Joe, you good?
I'm good, thank you.
Awesome. Hey, guys, thanks very much. This has been a great work on this, and thank you for listening to us.
Well, thank you.
No.
Well, thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it. And we'll reach out if we need you, but we really appreciate it.
I'll return when I get home.
Perfect. Yes. We are posting all of our meetings on the Cohasset website. And we're, doing our efforts to communicate to the impacted Cohasset residents as we move forward with the transition. But we really appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you want to make sure that, the ones that, these are mine that I copied.
Okay. Once the Joe can have your attention.
All right.
Yeah, I don't have the color copy.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, Kirk, hi.
Yeah. As far as the process for the public to be able to provide comment in the next draft of the regulations, I know that you're taking notes here today. We'll be going through the similar process at a subsequent meeting, and then, again, entertaining input from the citizens, or are we allowed to directly submit our recommendations to the committee to speed the process?
Feel free to provide any input to me, and I'm fairly certain, if not, I'll make sure my email is included on the town's committee website. I'll make sure that's there tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably have,
But we will be having another follow-up meeting to review all the suggestions.
I have a significant number of changes, it's just who I am.
Yeah, I know,
So,
and we appreciate that, and any other folks that are, for some reason, watching this are more than welcome to submit any of their suggestions to us as well.
And the version we come back with will hopefully not have all those red lines. Will be sort of like as accepted, and then any edits
That's great.
after today will sort of look like tonight.
That's
And those
perfect.
are the
No.
only ones that we'll have to decipher and look at.
This has been very, very helpful, and thank you. I think we've made a lot of progress here tonight.
Thank you for your comments. I think everyone provided some really key input, so.
Good.
Great.
Great. So we've got a couple more items on the agenda for tonight that we'll bang through pretty quickly here. First is just some updates on the various tasks on that committee. Some have made progress, others haven't. RFP world. I have an update if you don't.
I just got it today.
All right, good, yeah.
So it looks like the RFP's been pushed back till December 19th, the responses. That was addendum 3. Is that,
Yes, so the town published today an update, an addendum to their RFP, which indicated new dates. It's on the Hingham website for those folks who may be interested. They effectively pushed everything back about 3 weeks. They pushed back, I know that the town has received numerous questions from the interested bidders. The town has pushed back their ability to respond to November 26th. The proposals, therefore, which were originally due November 26th, are now due December 19th. The town has an optional interview period, January 8th and 9th. The town anticipates awarding the RFP to the third-party operator January 24th. Hopefully sign the contract by February 21st. And then, originally, the initial RFP indicated that the service would occur no earlier than March 1st. It's been pushed back a month to April 1st. So that's where things stand with the RFP presently.
You said April 1st,
Yeah, so the previous RFP indicated that that the operator in the town wouldn't take over any earlier than March 1st. The new date is, we will not take over any earlier than April 1st. And I'm happy to, if anyone needs a copy of the new updated schedule, again, it's on the town website, but I have a copy in hand. I'm sorry for stealing all your thunder, Joe. Anything else to comment on that?
Go ahead.
David?
I do not have any information on the process for evaluating the position or candidates.
Right, it's my understanding the town has not yet posted the position for the water
Correct.
superintendent yet, so that should be forthcoming in the next 6 weeks at some point. I don't know exactly when.
Okay.
I have a brief update on the communication. So, one of the things that we need is a name for the new water system. So, beginning tomorrow, this committee will be accepting suggestions for a name. So the town will be doing kind of a news blast tomorrow. There will be a few different things happening. On the town's website, on the front page of the town's website, you'll see a link where we're accepting citizens' input on a suggested name of the system and why they believe why they support that name. We have information appearing in a couple of periodicals, the Hingham Journal, the Hull Times. Cohasset is also publishing this. We're blasting out to social media tomorrow. And so the process will be that folks can submit either online their suggestions. There's going to be boxes in the town clerk's office of Hingham, Hull, and Cohasset for folks that want to submit a card. We'll have cards there available for folks that don't want to do it online. And then lastly, if folks are unable to make it to any of those places and they want to submit a name suggestion, they can also send a name suggestion into the Hingham Board of Selectmen, who will be accepting it via mail as well. We hope to collect them over the next few weeks. Our job as a committee will be to kind of cull the responses. Ultimately, the decision will be made by the water supervisors, and but it will be our job to kind of collate those recommendations and kind of give them a list of all the recommendations that come in. So.
When you
It'll
say
be
water
kinda fun.
supervisors, you mean select board?
The select board, yes.
PWC.
They'll be the ones making the final decision, but, we would love kind of creative names. Again, it's a system that's just not a Hingham-only system. We're providing services to multiple communities, and it would be nice to have a name that reflects that. So, put on your thinking hats out there if anyone is watching us. But you'll see a lot of information out there, kind of blasted out through a lot of different means over the next week or so. So look for that, please. So that will be a topic of one of our future meetings in December, to go through these names. Secondly, we're still in the process of determining what our communications method will be in terms of the actual transition. As you can imagine, there's going to be a lot of communication efforts that need to be done to ratepayers. So we're in the final stages of being in a position that we're going to send out and look for a professional consultant to help us with that. So I'm presently working with the town on drafting the scope of services that we'll be looking for from somebody. So I think we'll be hopefully finding somebody to help us with that in the next few weeks to a month as well on that. Any other updates? All right, great. So next is the last, I don't believe there's any comments from the public other than what we've heard tonight. Thank you for everyone's input tonight. So let's talk about next meeting date. So Ryan and Mark, so you guys are driving this bus on a lot of this stuff. What would be an appropriate kind of time frame do you think we should be meeting next?
Well, I think it's going to be with this next iteration of the rules and regs.
Yeah.
And so I'd suggest December 9th.
Okay.
I think that'll give enough time for town council to weigh in, and we can look at those comments as well.
Yeah. We'd want to distribute this to the committee after town council has done their review as well. So contingent on that happening,
Okay.
I think we should target.
That works for me.
I know, David, that you may have an issue with that.
I can try to power through it.
Okay, because
Yeah.
David's having some surgery, but he may be prone in a bed in the meeting, but that's...
I may stand instead of sit.
Does that work for you?
Yes.
So good, that actually correlates well with the collection of potential names, too. We've asked for folks to submit them by December 2nd, but I may push that back a little bit, so that would work. So let's plan on our next meeting, December 9th, 7 o'clock in this room, where we'll review the updated rules and regs. Any other topics anyone has? I will accept a motion to adjourn.
I will make that motion.
Second?
Second it?
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.